Her only cargo, a woman, carrying a secret too dangerous to be written.
He was America's hero, and she was Hollywood's goddess. But the sea chase wasn't about glory. It was about survival. A Nazi captain played by John Wayne, a romance shot in chaos, and a production that nearly sank before it reached the screen. The studio fought it, the cast clashed. In one storm, it almost killed them all. These are 20 weird facts about the sea chase. And tucked in the chaos, a director who filmed while dying, set sail. This voyage gets dark fast. Number 1. John Wayne playing a German sea captain wasn't just controversial, it was career suicide, or so everyone told him. In 1955, America was only a decade removed from World War II. The wounds were still fresh. Families had lost sons, brothers, fathers, and here was the Duke, the man who embodied American heroism in the dozens of war films, about to play a Nazi. Not a villain, but a principled German officer who disagreed with Hitler but still served his country. Warner Brothers was nervous. Wayne's agents were furious. They warned him the role could destroy his image, alienate his fan base, turn him into a pariah overnight. But Wayne didn't flinch. He'd spent the war making propaganda films while others fought, and that guilt never left him. He saw Captain Carl Ehrlich as a chance to explore something deeper than flag-waving heroism. A man caught between duty and conscience. The studio demanded script changes to soften the character. Wayne refused most of them. He wanted the moral complexity, the gray zone where heroes and enemies blurred. And when the film premiered, critics were split. Some called it brave, others called it betrayal. But Wayne never apologized. He'd taken the biggest risk of his career, and whether audiences forgave him or not, he'd finally played a character that felt real.
Officers' quarters are off limits to you, and this cab.
Number 2. Lana Turner didn't want to be there. Not on that ship, not in that role, not opposite John Wayne. She'd signed on to the sea chase thinking it would be a glamorous wartime romance, the kind Hollywood churned out with exotic locations and sweeping scores. What she got instead was cold water, violent weather, and a leading man who treated the set like a military operation. Turner was going through a brutal divorce from Lex Barker. Her personal life was tabloid fodder, and her emotional state was fragile. She needed something easy, something escapist. The sea chase was anything but. From day one, she clashed with director John Pharaoh, a former naval officer who ran the production like a boot camp. He demanded take after take, pushed through exhausting conditions, and showed little patience for anyone who couldn't keep up. Turner felt dismissed, sidelined, reduced to eye candy in a film that was really about Wayne's character. She later admitted she couldn't connect with the role of Elsa Keller, a woman fleeing her past who falls for the German captain. The script kept changing. Her scenes kept getting rewritten, and Wayne, focused and intense, barely spoke to her between takes. By the end of production, Turner told friends it was one of the most miserable experiences of her career, not because of cruelty, but because of isolation. She was a Hollywood star, adrift on a ship that didn't want her aboard. Number 3. Director John Farrar wasn't just making a movie, he was racing death. Pharaoh had suffered a series of heart attacks in the years leading up to the sea chase, and his doctors warned him that another film, especially one this physically demanding, could kill him, but Pharaoh ignored them. He'd served in the Royal Canadian Navy during World War I, survived brutal conditions at sea, and he saw this film as his chance to tell a story that mattered. A story about men at sea, about honor in impossible circumstances, about the thin line between duty and madness. So he pushed himself harder than anyone on set. He climbed rigging, shouted directions through storms, worked 16-hour days without rest. The cast and crew watched him with a mix of awe and horror. He'd clutch his chest between takes, swallow pills, wave off concern, and keep going. Wayne later said Pharaoh directed like a man who knew his time was running out. Every shot had to be perfect. Every scene had to matter. There was no room for mediocrity, no patience for excuses, and the strange thing was, it worked. The film has a desperate energy, a sense of urgency that feels real because it was real. Pharaoh was filming his own countdown, turning mortality into cinema. He'd survived the shoot, but barely, and he'd never direct with that same intensity again. Number 4. The ship wasn't a set, It was a floating death trap. Warner Brothers didn't build a replica for the Sea Chase. They bought an actual World War II-era German freighter, the SS Ergenstrasse, and converted it for filming. On paper, it seemed like the perfect choice. Authentic design, real maritime feel, practical for ocean shooting. But the moment the cast and crew stepped aboard, they realized the ship was falling apart. Rust ate through the hull, engines misfired. Safety equipment was outdated or missing entirely. The vessel had been decommissioned for a reason, and now they were taking it out into open water with a full cast and crew. John Wayne, who'd spent time on naval vessels during USO tours, immediately saw the danger. He confronted the producers, demanding inspections and repairs. Some were made, but not enough. The ship still leaked, the electrical systems were unreliable, and when they hit rough seas during filming, the entire structure groaned and buckled in ways that terrified everyone aboard. Cast members started wearing life vests between takes. Crew members drew straws to see who had to work in the lower decks. And through it all, Pharaoh kept filming, pushing through the fear because he knew they'd never get these conditions in a studio tank. The authenticity was real, so was the danger, and every person on that ship knew they were one bad wave away from disaster.
Back streets, slips out of Sydney Harbor and heads for escape.
Number 5. The storm scene almost became a real tragedy. They'd been filming for weeks, waiting for the perfect weather conditions to shoot the climactic sequence where the ship faces a massive storm. When the forecast finally showed rough seas ahead, Pharaoh ordered the crew to sail into it. No special effects, no rear projection, just real wind and real waves crashing over a real deck. What they didn't know was that the storm was worse than predicted. Waves reached 30 feet, the ship pitched violently, and suddenly, what was supposed to be controlled chaos became actual chaos. Lana Turner was thrown against a bulkhead, bruising her ribs. A cameraman nearly went overboard, saved only by a grip who grabbed his belt at the last second. Equipment broke loose, sliding across the deck like missiles. John Wayne, strapped to the wheel for the scene, kept acting even as water poured over him, even as the ship listed at angles that should have triggered an evacuation. Pharaoh, soaked and shouting, refused to call cut. He knew they'd never get this footage again, and he was right. The storm sequence became the most powerful moment in the film, but the cost was real fear, real injuries, and a crew that finished filming and immediately got drunk to forget what they'd just survived. Some called it brilliant filmmaking, others called it reckless endangerment, and looking back, both were true. Number 6. John Wayne and director John Farrar had a complicated relationship that went beyond the film. They'd worked together before on Hondo, and that shoot had been tense. Pharaoh was a perfectionist, a control freak, a former military man who demanded discipline. Wayne was a star who'd earned the right to have opinions, to question choices, to push back when something didn't feel right. On the Sea Chase, those tensions exploded. Wayne thought Pharaoh was taking unnecessary risk with the cast and crew. Pharaoh thought Wayne was being soft, protecting people who didn't need protection. They fought constantly, sometimes in front of everyone, sometimes in Pharaoh's cabin where shouting matches could be heard through the walls. Wayne wanted to call off shooting during the worst weather. Pharaoh accused him of cowardice. Wayne threatened to walk off the production. Pharaoh dared him to try. But beneath the conflict was mutual respect. Wayne understood that Pharaoh's obsession came from genuine passion, from a need to make something that mattered. And Pharaoh knew that Wayne's concerns came from leadership, from a man who commanded respect in Hollywood by actually caring about the people around him. By the end of filming, they weren't friends, but they'd created something neither could have made alone. And when Pharaoh died a few years later, Wayne sent flowers to the funeral with a note that simply said, "You crazy bastard, you made me better." Number 7. The love scenes between Wayne and Turner were reshot more than any other sequence in the film, not because they were bad, but because they felt wrong. There was no chemistry. Warner Brothers had paired two major stars expecting magic, but what they got was awkwardness. Wayne was playing against type, vulnerable and conflicted. Turner was disconnected, going through the motions. And when they finally filmed the big romantic scene, the one that was supposed to be the emotional heart of the movie, it fell completely flat. The studio executives watched the dailies and panicked. They couldn't release a romance with no romance. So they brought in a script doctor to rewrite the scenes, adding dialogue, changing the blocking, trying to create sparks that simply weren't there. Pharaoh shot the sequences again and again, trying different angles, different lighting, different emotional beats. Nothing worked. Finally, someone had an idea. Instead of fighting the lack of chemistry, why not make it part of the story? Lean into the distance, the awkwardness, the sense that these two people were thrown together by circumstance, not passion. Make it about survival, not love. So they rewrote key scenes to reflect that tension, that uncertainty. And strangely enough, it worked. The relationship felt more real precisely because it didn't feel like Hollywood. It felt like two damaged people clinging to each other in a war that neither of them asked for. The studio hated it, but audiences responded. Sometimes the best chemistry is no chemistry at all.
To understand you. Or even liking you.
Number 8. The budget spiraled out of control faster than anyone anticipated. Warner Brothers had approved the sea chase, thinking it would be a straightforward action, film shot mostly at sea with minimal sets. What they got was a logistical nightmare that burned through money like fuel. The ship required constant repairs. Weather delays cost tens of thousands of dollars a day. Equipment was damaged by saltwater and had to be replaced. And every time Pharaoh demanded another take, another angle, another push for perfection, the costs climbed higher. Studio executives started showing up on location, demanding explanations, threatening to shut down production. Pharaoh ignored them. He knew that if he stopped, if he compromised, the film would lose what made it special. Wayne backed him up, using his star power to keep the studio at bay. But the tension was constant. Every day was a negotiation, a fight to keep shooting, a battle to justify why this scene needed more time, more money, more effort. By the time production wrapped, the sea chase had gone 40% over budget. Warner Brothers was furious. They slashed the marketing campaign, gave it a quiet release, and essentially buried the film. It didn't matter that Pharaoh and Wayne had created something unique. It didn't matter that they'd taken real risk to capture something authentic. All that mattered to the studio was the bottom line. And the sea chase became a lesson Hollywood would remember for decades. Artistic ambition without financial discipline is a sin that never gets forgiven. Number 9. There was a supporting actor on the sea chase who almost stole the entire movie, and his name was Lyle Bettger. He played Kirchner, the Nazi officer who's the real villain of the story, and he brought an intensity that terrified everyone on set. Bettger had built a career playing psychopaths and sadists, but this was different. This was calculated, cold, ideological evil. He didn't choose scenery, he didn't overact. He just stared with dead eyes and delivered his lines with the kind of certainty that made your skin crawl. Between takes, Bettger stayed in character. He didn't joke with the crew, he didn't make small talk. He sat alone, reading books about Nazi ideology, immersing himself in a mindset that disgusted him but fascinated him as an actor. Wayne later said, working opposite Bettger was genuinely unsettling. Not because he was scared, but because Bettger's commitment was so total that it created a real sense of menace on set. In one scene, Bettger's character confronts Wayne's captain about his lack of party loyalty. The tension was supposed to be simmering, but Bettger pushed it further, getting in Wayne's face, making the threat visceral. Pharaoh loved it. He let the scene run longer than scripted, capturing something raw and dangerous. When the film was released, critics barely noticed Bettger's performance. But decades later, film scholars would point to him as the secret weapon of the sea chase, the actor who made the moral stakes feel real. Because every great hero needs a great villain, and Bettger gave them one they'd never forget. Number 10. The ending of the sea chase wasn't what anyone expected, and it almost destroyed the film's commercial prospects. In typical Hollywood fashion, test audiences wanted a happy ending. They wanted Wayne and Turner to escape together, to find freedom and peace. But that's not what Pharaoh shot. The original ending was darker, more ambiguous, more true to the brutal reality of war. Wayne's character makes choices that can't be undone. Turner's character faces consequences that can't be escaped. And the film ends not with triumph, but with quiet devastation. Warner Brothers demanded changes. They wanted reshoots, a new ending, something audiences could feel good about. Pharaoh refused. He'd already pushed his body to the breaking point. He'd already fought for every frame of the film, and he wasn't going to betray the story in the final moments just to sell more tickets. Wayne stood by him. Together, they told the studio that the ending stayed, or they'd both walk away. The studio blinked. The ending stayed. But it cost them. When the Sea Chase was released, audiences left theaters confused, unsatisfied. They didn't understand why the film denied them the resolution they'd been conditioned to expect. Critics called it incomplete, unsatisfying, a story that didn't know how to finish. But Pharaoh knew exactly what he was doing. He was making a film about the cost of war, the impossibility of redemption, the way good people get destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. It wasn't entertainment, it was truth, and Hollywood has never forgiven honesty. Number 11. The film's technical advisor was a former German U-boat commander, and his presence on set created an atmosphere nobody anticipated. His name was Commander Wolfgang Müller, and Warner Brothers hired him to ensure authenticity in the naval sequences. But Müller brought more than technical expertise. He brought memories, real ones, dark ones. He'd served in the Kriegsmarine, had watched men die, had given orders that sent ships to the bottom of the ocean, and now he was standing on a Hollywood set, watching actors pretend to live through what he'd actually survived. The crew didn't know how to talk to him. Some avoided him entirely. Others peppered him with questions he clearly didn't want to answer. Wayne was the only one who treated him normally, sitting with him during breaks, listening to stories Müller had never told anyone. In one scene, Wayne's character has to make a decision about pursuing an enemy vessel, knowing it would cost lives. Müller watched the rehearsal and quietly approached Pharaoh. "That's not how it happens," he said. "When you give that order, you don't look noble, you look sick. Because you know exactly what you're doing." Pharaoh reshot the scene with Wayne playing it differently, more haunted, more human, and Müller nodded approval. "That's it," he said. "That's the truth." By the end of filming, Müller had become an unofficial cast member, present but silent, a ghost from a war that refused to stay buried. When production wrapped, he shook Wayne's hand and said something that stuck with the Duke for the rest of his life. "You played a better German than I ever was." Number 12. The script went through 7 different writers before cameras rolled, and by the end, nobody knew whose vision they were filming anymore. It started as an adaptation of a novel by Andrew Gere, a straightforward naval adventure about a German freighter trying to reach home waters at the start of World War II. But each writer brought different ideas, different themes, different politics. One version emphasized romance, another turned it into pure action. A third tried to make it a meditation on the nature of loyalty. By the time it reached John Farrow, the script was a mess of competing tones and contradictory character motivations. Pharaoh did what he always did. He threw out half of it and started rewriting on set. This drove the studio insane because they couldn't track what was being filmed, couldn't predict the final cut, couldn't control the narrative. Actors would show up to shoot a scene only to discover their dialogue had been completely changed overnight. Lana Turner stopped trying to memorize lines. She'd just read the new pages minutes before filming and hoped for the best. Wayne, more experienced with chaotic productions, rolled with it, but even he admitted it felt like building a ship while sailing it. The result was a film that feels disjointed, uneven, like 3 different movies fighting for the same screen. Critics would later point to this as a fatal flaw, like watching something raw and unfinished, something that hadn't been polished into corporate submission. Number 13. Tab Hunter was supposed to be in the film, playing a young German officer who serves under Wayne's command. He was perfect for it, young, handsome, with that kind of innocent face that would make his character's moral corruption even more devastating. But Warner Brothers had a problem. Hunter was secretly gay at a time when that could destroy a career overnight, and studio executives were paranoid about scandal. So they pulled him from the Sea Chase at the last minute, replacing him with a lesser-known actor who brought none of Hunter's complexity. The decision devastated Hunter, who'd been preparing for months, who'd seen this role as a breakthrough opportunity, and it left a hole in the film that's still visible. The young officer character feels underwritten, underdeveloped, a plot device instead of a person. Years later, Hunter would talk about the Sea Chase as one of the great what-ifs of his career. Not because the film was a masterpiece, but because it represented everything wrong with Hollywood in the 1950s. Talent didn't matter. Truth didn't matter. All that mattered was image, control, the ability to manufacture reality and call it entertainment. Hunter survived. He'd go on to have a successful career, but he never forgot being erased from a film for the crime of being himself. Number 14. David Farrar, the British actor playing Wayne's second-in-command, hated being at sea so much he vomited between almost every take. Not from seasickness, but from fear. Farrar had nearly drowned as a child and had avoided water ever since, but he needed the paycheck, needed the exposure of working with John Wayne, so he lied on his casting interview and said he was fine with ocean filming. He wasn't fine. From day one, he was a wreck, pale, shaking, barely able to focus. The crew thought he was ill. Wayne thought he was drunk. Nobody knew the truth until halfway through production, when Farrar finally broke down and admitted his terror to the first assistant director. By then, most of his scenes were shot. There was no turning back. So, Farrar did something remarkable. He used the fear. He let it inform his performance, channeling genuine anxiety into his character's growing paranoia and desperation. What was supposed to be a straightforward supporting role became something darker, more unpredictable. You can see it on screen. The way his eyes dart toward the water, the way his hands never stop moving, the way he flinches at every wave. Farrar turned weakness into authenticity, and decades later, acting coaches would study his performance as an example of how real emotion, even unwanted emotion, can elevate a scene beyond what's written on the page. Number 15. The film's most expensive scene was never used. Pharaoh had planned an elaborate sequence where Wayne's ship encounters a British destroyer and has to outmaneuver it through a narrow strait. It required coordinating multiple vessels, aerial photography, hundreds of extras, and precise timing. Warner Brothers allocated a massive budget for it. They brought in naval consultants, hired additional ships, cleared permits. The day of shooting arrived with perfect weather, perfect light, everything aligned. And then, the primary camera failed. Not a small technical glitch, but a catastrophic mechanical failure that couldn't be fixed on location. Pharaoh tried to continue with backup cameras, but they couldn't capture the scope he needed. After 6 hours of attempting workarounds, he finally called it. They'd lost the window. The ships had to return to port. The extras were released, and the scene was scrapped. The loss devastated Pharaoh. He'd visualized that sequence for months, had storyboarded every angle, but there was no money to try again. The studio had already hemorrhaged cash on delays and repairs. So Pharaoh rewrote around it, creating a different confrontation that happened mostly off-screen, suggested through dialogue and reaction shots. It worked, barely, but everyone involved knew the film was missing its centerpiece. Sometimes the greatest scenes in cinema are the ones that never got filmed. Number 16. Claude Akins made his film debut in The Sea Chase, and he almost got fired before anyone knew his name. Akins played a crew member with a thick accent and rough demeanor, and Pharaoh cast him based on a single audition. But on set, Akins was lost. He had never worked with professional film equipment, didn't understand blocking, kept missing his marks. Other actors grew frustrated. Crew members complained. Pharaoh was ready to replace him. Then John Wayne intervened. He pulled Akins aside between takes and gave him a masterclass in film acting. "Don't try to act," Wayne told him. "Just listen and react. Don't worry about the camera, it'll find you." Akins listened, and suddenly, he clicked. His performance became natural, lived in, real. After filming, Wayne told Pharaoh that Akins reminded him of himself when he was starting out. Raw, unpolished, but with something genuine underneath. Pharaoh agreed to keep him, and Claude Akins went on to have a career spanning 4 decades, appearing in over 100 films and TV shows. Years later, someone asked Akins who taught him how to act. He said, "John Wayne on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Best film school I ever attended." Number 17. The film's musical score was composed by Roy Webb, and he wrote it while recovering from surgery, in constant pain, racing against deadlines he could barely meet. Webb had been a reliable composer for RKO and Warner Brothers for years, but his health was failing. Still, he took the sea chase because he needed the money and because the story spoke to him. He composed the main theme in a hospital bed, orchestrated the action sequences while medicated, and conducted the recording sessions while visibly struggling. Musicians who worked with him said it was heartbreaking to watch. He'd clutch the podium, pause to breathe, then continue conducting with fierce determination. The score he created was haunting and melancholic, perfectly capturing the film's dark tone. But by the time the film was released, Webb was too ill to attend the premiere. He died less than a year later. The Sea Chase would be one of his final completed works, a farewell from a composer who poured everything he had left into a film most people would forget. But listen to that score again. Really listen. You can hear a man who knew he was running out of time, turning mortality into music. Number 18. Warner Brothers tried to save the film in post-production by cutting it down to 90 minutes, removing entire character arcs and subplots. The original cut ran over 2 hours, and test audiences found it slow, depressing, too complex. So, studio editors went to work with ruthless efficiency. They stripped out backstory, condensed dialogue scenes, removed any moment that didn't directly serve the main plot. The result was a film that moved faster, but made less sense. Character motivations became unclear. Emotional beats felt unearned. The moral complexity that Pharaoh had fought so hard to preserve got reduced to simple good versus evil. When Pharaoh saw the theatrical cut, he walked out of the screening room and didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. Wayne was more diplomatic, but equally disgusted. They'd made a film about the cost of war, and the studio had turned it into just another action picture. Years later, film historians would search for Pharaoh's original cut, hoping it still existed somewhere in the Warner Brothers vault. It didn't. The footage had been destroyed to save storage space. All that remained was the compromised version, a ghost of what the Sea Chase could have been. Sometimes the greatest tragedy in filmmaking isn't failure. It's having success stolen from you by people who never understood what you were trying to create. Number 19. The Sea Chase premiered quietly in 1955 and was met with reviews ranging from lukewarm to hostile. Critics couldn't forgive John Wayne for playing a German. They couldn't accept the film's moral ambiguity, and they definitely couldn't embrace its dark ending. Box office was modest at best. Warner Brothers wrote it off as a failed experiment and moved on. But something strange happened over the decades. The film found a second life on television, then home video, then streaming. New audiences discovered it without the baggage of post-war sensitivity. They saw a complicated war film that refused easy answers, a performance by Wayne that showed range beyond his typical persona, and a director's final desperate attempt to say something true about conflict and conscience. Film critics began reassessing it, noting its influence on later morally complex war films. The Sea Chase never became a classic, but it earned something perhaps more valuable: respect. The kind that comes not from immediate success, but from quiet persistence, from refusing to be completely forgotten. Number 20. In the final week of shooting, John Wayne received word that his marriage to Pilar was falling apart. She wanted a divorce. The timing couldn't have been worse. Wayne was exhausted, emotionally drained from playing against type, frustrated with the chaotic production, and now his personal life was collapsing. But he didn't stop working. He didn't ask for time off. He just kept showing up, kept hitting his marks, kept delivering lines about duty and sacrifice while his own world crumbled. Pharaoh knew something was wrong. Everyone did. But Wayne never talked about it. Not once. It was only years later, in interviews, that Wayne would admit the Sea Chase represented one of the darkest periods of his life. And maybe that's why his performance has such weight, such genuine pain. He wasn't acting. He was surviving. Bonus fact. After the film wrapped, the ship used in filming was sold to a salvage company and scrapped for parts. Within months, it was gone, melted down, recycled, erased. And in a way, that felt appropriate for the Sea Chase. A film about ghosts made by people racing death, shot on a vessel that was falling apart, edited by a studio that never believed in it. Nothing about it was built to last. And yet somehow, 70 years later, it still exists. Imperfect, complicated, uncomfortable, just like the war it tried to capture. The sea chase wasn't a masterpiece, but it was honest. And in Hollywood, honesty is rarer than perfection.